Good afternoon, guys. Hope you're doing well. The time is currently 1:28 p.m. On the 2nd of September. Today is a Monday. I didn't get a chance on the weekend to record a little something, so I thought I'd just go ahead and do it now while I'm on my lunch break from work. Yeah, so today I want to talk about how everyone should learn to be creative, or how important it is to be creative, even if you consider yourself as a person that's not creative, or the work that you do, isn't a creative field. It's not writing or art, or one of these what you would consider typically creative subjects or fields. The value of being artistic or being creative cannot be overlooked. And I read a book quite a while ago, a few years ago, called The Beginning of Infinity. It's a book by David Deutsch, and the book is, I'll say, more related to philosophy rather than creativeness. But creativity is something that comes up in parts of the book. And when it comes up in parts of the book, it comes under the context that, scientists or people who come up with theories or people who have advanced technologies have all inherently been creative people. And what does he mean by that? By that, he means anytime we have a theory about how something works, that has been a creative step to come up with an idea of, why does the sun shine, for example, right? Now we know it's because of, there's chemical and atomic reactions being carried out within the sun. There's different elements, fusing into heavier elements, and those release energy, which we can see as light. But before that, someone had to come up with a different theory. And, perhaps one of these theories was there's a bunch of people who, it's a bit of a silly example. There's a bunch of people who live within the sun and they ride bikes that power the sun, right? And it seems stupid looking at it now because we know, or we have a good idea how the sun works. But before people knew why the sun emits light, someone had to come up with a goofy theory about why it worked, and then actually tested that theory. And then when that theory gets debunked, then they know that that is not the case. And it talks about, or I remember from the book at least, it talks about like elementary particles in physics. And a lot of us understand that most things are made out of protons and neutrons and electrons, and that was our base understanding of physics and how things are made up. But then someone had a theory, and they looked into this theory, and they sort of found enough evidence for it to be accepted as true. And was about quarks. And quarks are things that make up protons and electrons and neutrons. And quarks, I think there's six types. I think there's up, down, top, bottom, and I think there's two more. I can't remember. It's been a long, long time since I last studied physics. But the idea is that someone had to come up with this theory to say, hey, maybe this is how things work. Let's test it out, see if it works. And if it's true and if it works, then perhaps we can carry on using this to build our understanding of other things. But now onto why I think you should be creative in general is everything you do relies on some sort of creativity, right? Even at work, right? So for example, I'll use my work as an example. I work in cybersecurity. Part of my work is sometimes looking at different logs or trying to figure out how, one person can get from point A to point B without, triggering any alarms or any systems. And that involves trying to be creative with the way that I put myself in those shoes. When I put myself in the shoes of a hacker, trying to figure out how would a hacker actually go about doing this, that takes a lot of creativity. If for example you're a financial analyst for, if you work in investment banking or any that sort of field, if you're doing analysis on a company, in typically you look at things like their profit equity, their revenue, their profits, their growth over time. But then you can also be a bit more creative with it. And I think some shows do this in a really good way. So one show that comes to mind is Billions. And in Billions, they have some financial analysts who work as part of this company who do, trading. And one of these analysts, has the idea of using satellite imagery to actually see if that company is actually building factories or manufacturing products like they say they are. So you do that by looking at, are there actually trucks that are coming in and out of that factory, supplying and taking away goods? And that is a very non-typical way to actually approach one of, this type of situation. So by having a creative mindset, you can actually, it makes it easier for you to find solutions to the problems in your day-to-day life or in your work life, whatever it may be. And being creative, it's all about finding out if something works, and if it doesn't work, why didn't it work? And if it does work, great. We can continue to use it. But that first step of it is always being creative. And this creativity extends into, I'll use video games as an example, because I'm sure people who are watching this video probably play some sort of video games, whether it's Call of Duty or League of Legends or Valorant or whatever, right? The top teams, the top players, right, always come up with new and innovative strategies that people haven't ever thought of or considered, right? So a player might, pick a character that normally isn't picked in a game, but then they do it in a way which actually works very well. And then all of a sudden, that character becomes meta, or that character becomes widely popular for that particular reason. But before that individual had, that creative brainwave and chose to play that character in a certain way, or using, a certain gun with a certain loadouts or whatever else, right? People had no idea that it was possible. But as soon as one person was creative with it and then showcased it in a big enough area or big enough platform, all of a sudden that thing became widely popular. And that's sort of how science works as well. We have a theory, whether it's spatial relativity or general relativity, there have been different theories over time. And, sometimes the theories get debunked, saying, there's not enough evidence to actually support this, or the evidence actually contradicts this. In other cases, there's enough evidence to support it, and then that becomes, the general theory that is accepted within the community, until someone else comes along with another theory, which is perhaps, a step further out, but again requires creativity to actually think of that theory in the first place. And then the process restarts. Someone comes up with a new theory, which, either builds upon the current theory or tries to, debunk the current theory. And then people go and research it and test it, and then you come up with a conclusion of if it works or not. The same thing applies with work. Obviously I've given two examples of, being a financial analyst or working in cybersecurity. But honestly, like the medical field is all about being creative. Sometimes there's symptoms that a patient may show, which perhaps aren't typical of a certain diagnosis, or perhaps are very, very uncommon for particular diagnoses. And it's about, obviously a lot of my knowledge comes from, TV dramas about medical and whatnot, but, being creative in the way that you can run certain run certain tests to actually get some more information and validate these theories. So you need to be creative in the way that, you're able to run these tests. Obviously, it's easier said than done. But being creative in the way that you operate and you think about these symptoms, what are the confounding variables? If you do, specific tests, can you isolate certain, variables or markers in the blood or whatever it may be, to actually identify what the root cause of the issue actually is? Because, in some cases, some tests may not be conclusive. They may not give you the full picture. And if you don't have the full picture, or, you may not be able to diagnose the patient correctly. But if you're able, if you have that creative mindset or that creative approach, and you understand the tools that are available to you, that's an important thing. It's not just about being creative, it's understanding what tools are available to you, and when and where to use them. You can use different tools to gain additional evidence that you can use to build a case for that patient being diagnosed with whatever condition it may be. Right? So being creative isn't just for people who are, work in creative jobs or, do creative work. It's for everyone. And learning to be creative is a little bit of a tough process. I think it's sort of accepting. I think the biggest thing is accepting that you can be creative and that you are creative, and understanding what parts of your life are you currently creative in. So yeah, so for me, being more creative, part of it was I enjoyed photography, right? I borrowed my friend's camera. I ended up borrowing it for 2 or 3 years. He was always busy, so he only lived down the road from me, but I was never able to get back to him. We would still speak regularly and whatnot. We were still good friends, and I used his camera quite a lot. I took it with me when I went on holidays. When I went out with friends, I used it to take a lot of pictures. And then eventually he asked for the camera back. I gave it back. And then at that point, I said, I really enjoyed using his camera for, those number of years. I'm going to get my own camera. And eventually I bought my own camera. I did some research. I waited for some sales. And then I bought my own camera. And using photography as sort of my creative, I don't want to say outlet, but, something that I can use to help develop my creativity, I've quite enjoyed because it's actually taught me to look at things from a different perspective. And I now see, pictures or potential photographs that I can take that other people that I'm with don't actually see. We were walking past a road that I usually walk down with some of my friends, and then I saw a building in the distance, and we walked past it, and then I said, I saw it. I thought, that might make a good picture. We carried on walking, and then literally 10 seconds later, I said, you know what? That's a really good shot. I want to go back and take it. So we walked back. It was only literally like 10, 15 meters. We walked back and I took the shot. And he said, like, my friend said to me, he doesn't understand how I saw that shot, like the framing of the image. Um, he said he doesn't understand how I saw the framing of the image because we both walked past it together and we both looked at it at the same time. And that's because at this point I had been, doing photography for a year or two, and I've sort of developed, I don't want to call it a sixth sense, but I'm able to see what might make a good picture. And a lot of that has been trial and error. I've taken so many bad pictures. I've taken so many pictures of things that I thought would look cool or would look nice or would look very well framed in a particular way. And then I've taken a picture, I've gone home, I've looked at it, and I've realized this picture is rubbish, this picture sucks. And it helps build an intuition of things that would actually work and might not actually work. So for me, that's helped to develop my creative perspective or creative vision, and that eventually just bleeds into the other aspects of your life, right? So for example, recording these videos, my setup is I use OBS. I use an application called Droid. So it's a camera software for your phone. So I'm currently using my phone as the camera, and that image gets streamed to my PC where it pulls up on OBS and I can actually record it. This is sort of the alternative. The alternative or the typical approach would be to go buy a webcam, buy an expensive webcam that can record in HD or 4K, 30 FPS, 60 FPS, whatever it is, and then use that to record the videos. The webcam I have is a very basic, bare bones one. The picture quality isn't that great, but I didn't want to spend money on a new webcam for something I didn't know, how long I would be doing it for. So what I ended up doing is using my phone. I had that creative idea to see if, hey, maybe there's a software where I can turn my phone into a webcam. Yes, I can literally record from my phone, but then the issue with that is I can't use the microphone that I use with my computer. So the audio quality perhaps won't be as great. So doing it this way, not only do I get the video quality from my phone in these videos, but I also get to use the audio quality of my microphone on my PC because I'm recording through OBS. So it's coming up with creative solutions like this. And, in my field, or if you're into software engineering, for example, the field is all about being creative. If you have a problem, especially if you're working on, a novel idea or, working at a startup, a lot of these ideas are novel and they haven't been done before and they require creative thinking, whether in terms of speed, efficiency, security, how can we best actually code this, but even things in terms of design, so user experience. People who do user experience work have to be creative. They have to understand not only how the users will actually look and see and interact with your website or your application, whatever it is, but also think of new ways to make sure people click where you want them to click. And that takes a lot of creative understanding and a lot of trial and error. You try something, if it works. If it doesn't, you scrap it and you go back to the start. But yeah, I think everyone has things they do in their day-to-day life which is creative. And I think it's about understanding that and understanding and accepting that the things you are doing are actually creative. Hey, this thing I've done, or the way I approach X, Y, and Z thing is actually very, very creative. How can I apply this to other pieces of my life? If you're into cooking, if you cook your own meals, cooking is for the most part a very creative thing. Yes, you can follow recipes if you're not used to cooking, but you're still learning. You can use recipes and those tell you exactly how much of X, Y, and Z to use. But once you're more familiar, you start to, measure things out by eye. And when you measure things out by eye and then you're tasting your food, that's a little bit creative because you're not following the recipe, so you're not following it exact step by step. But you're also being a little bit creative in terms of, okay, if I add a bit more salt, or if I add a bit more spice, or if I add a bit more of this spice or that herb, how is that going to impact the actual final dish? And a lot of cooking is trial and error. I've tried recipes, or I've tried to just go with the flow on certain recipes, and I make something, and I've not really enjoyed what I made. It tasted, whether it was too salty or it was too whatever else. But that's part of the learning process and part of being creative. You're gonna have failures, and the idea is that you learn from those failures and then actually do it again, but make it better. So every day you probably do a lot of things that can be classed as creative. You just don't see them as creative, or you don't accept them as creative. And once you do, you're able to actually apply these to other things in your life. And I think it's such a very core skill to actually sort of broadening your horizons and being good at what you do. And this can even apply to, you probably see articles about, I remember this article, I can't remember exactly how it went, but this person wanted to apply for a job. So what they did, they wanted to get in touch with the CEO or whoever the hiring manager was. So what they did, they bought a box of donuts, and inside the box they taped their resume or their CV. And then they basically went into this building. They went to the reception because you can't go up otherwise, and they basically said, "This is a delivery for so and so person." And then the receptionist obviously took the box and gave it to the CEO, whoever it was. And then when they opened it, obviously they saw the resume or the CV, and then that basically got the person the job, because the CEO or whoever the hiring manager was saw that, hey, this person is super creative in their approach, even if that person was perhaps a little bit underqualified, or didn't meet the requirements of the role in specifically. They actually took initiative and actually did something that most people wouldn't do in order to get what they want, and that got them the job. um or in the case of social engineering, again, a cybersecurity thing, where you go in and you use people to actually try to get what you want, right? So a typical thing is, if someone wants to get into a building that they don't have access to, maliciously as well, right? You go into reception, you sit there, you say, oh, you're waiting for so and so, or you're waiting for somebody, and you sit there for an hour, and then you go up to reception and say, oh, I'm still waiting for this person, but I really need to use the toilet. Can you let me up to whatever floor so I can go use the toilet? And historically, that has worked very well. That means you now have access to the building. They've let you in through the secure gates to the particular floor where you may want to be. And for hackers, this is like a great thing to do. And this is what's called physical penetration testing. It's seeing what physical controls are in place in terms of gates, doors, scanners, people are in place to actually stop you, or stop uninvited people actually going where they want to go. um I'm starting to ramble now, but yeah, to summarize, being creative is vastly underrated and is wildly important in all aspects of life. We do a lot of things every day which count as being creative. We just don't accept it as being creative, and being creative can help you in your day job. And I think that applies to every single job that exists. I think there's always some place you can be creative, which will lead you to being more efficient or faster or better at your job, and perhaps picking up a hobby that is more typically classed as creative. In my case, it's photography. For you, it might be drawing or making music or producing beats. Any of those are actually completely valid in terms of getting those creative juices flowing, and then actually seeing, once you're used to being creative, or you're used to coming up with ideas or doing things in a new way, you actually start to apply that to the other parts of your life and see where can you actually make things better. um Even if you're like a business person or entrepreneur or whatever, like serial entrepreneurs who have successful companies are like, their biggest thing is that they're super creative, because they find ways to, first they find a problem. You have to be creative to find a problem. Two, they solve them. Again, you have to be creative. And if you're an entrepreneur or you're bootstrapping, which means you don't have money to actually hire people, and like if you're bootstrapping a business, which means, yeah, you have no money, you're trying to get customers and start getting revenue, that is at its core very creative, because you have to do everything without money. So this could be like guerrilla marketing warfare. Guerrilla marketing warfare. The example that comes to mind is Red Bull. So Red Bull basically, as part of their marketing, paid to have empty cans of Red Bull basically dumped into trash cans, and basically have the trash cans overflowing. So, and people like, hey, what's Red Bull? Why are these trash cans full of it? Are people actually drinking Red Bull? This was before Red Bull was, as big as it is now. And whichever marketing person came up with that, had to be super, super creative. And that is known as one of the most successful marketing campaigns by Red Bull, but it's also one that is, studied or well known. So I think, yeah, once you get started with being creative, again, it takes some time, but once you get there and you start to see things in a different perspective, it actually opens your eyes a lot to different ways of doing things and how you can make things better for yourself. But yeah, that's for this one. Apologies if I rambled a bit much. Yeah, catch you on the next one.